Here we are at our nation's capital, shooting from the other side of the Potomac River. We're looking at Washington, D.C. D.C. stands for District of Corruption because our nation has been corrupted by the international Jewish banksters of Mystery Babylon. Here we are at the monument to Iwo Jima, and we have to point out that historians have proven that Franklin D. Roosevelt knew that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor, and he failed to inform the military brass in Hawaii that they were going to attack. So this statue, this monument, is of men who were forced into a needless war that we had no business fighting, because Roosevelt needed an excuse to attack Germany, and allowing the Japanese to attack Pearl Harbor gave him the excuse, the probable cause for getting involved in World War II. Just about every historian now will admit that Roosevelt fully knew that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor at least 1 week to 10 days before the actual attack. Here we are at the site of the Glastonbury thorn tree in Washington, D.C. at the Washington National Cathedral. Legend has it that this tree is an offshoot of the Glastonbury thorn tree in Britain when Joseph of Arimathea plucked his or punched his staff into the ground at Glastonbury. One day it bloomed and became a tree. And later on in history, someone plucked a branch off of it and brought it here to Washington, D.C., and it grew into this thorn tree. Now, the significance of this is the fact that Britain and America are Ephraim and Manasseh, the tribe of Joseph. And that's why we have two Glastonbury thorn trees, one in Britain, one here in America. In order to prove that Washington disapproved of the Illuminati, we're going to quote from letters that he wrote to Reverend G.W. Snyder, who sent Washington a copy of the book Proofs of a Conspiracy by John Robeson. After reading that book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, which is about the Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt and Meyer Amschel Rothschild, this is what Washington wrote back. Quote, I have heard much of the nefarious and dangerous plan and doctrines of the Illuminati, but never saw the book until you were pleased to send it to me. I must correct an error you have run into of my presiding over the English lodges in this country. The fact is, I preside over none, nor have I been in one more than once or twice within the last 30 years. In October 1798, he wrote to the same Reverend Snyder saying, quote, it was not my intention to doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati and the principles of Jacobinism, Jacobinism is a strictly Jewish secret society, had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more truly satisfied of this fact than I am. The idea I meant to convey was that I did not believe that the lodges of Freemasons in this country had, as societies, endeavored to propagate the diabolical tenets of the first, or pernicious principles of the latter. That individuals may have had this object and actually had a separation of the people from their government in view is too evident to be questioned. So Washington is telling us that, number one, he disapproves of the methods and tactics of the Illuminati, and number two, that he himself could not be considered an Illuminatus. In this final section of our documentary, we're going to prove to you that the Jewish people, the Jewish rabbis, Judaism as a religion, the synagogue of Satan, and Mystery Babylon are all one and the same. Now, documenting historically the fact that the Jewish people have been kicked out of almost 200 city-states and nations throughout history, we are going to mention some of these. First of all, Mainz, Germany, in the year 1012. The Jews were kicked out of France in the year 1182. Upper Bavaria, 1276. England, 1290. France again, 1306. France yet again, 1322. Saxony, 1349. Hungary, 1360. Belgium, 1370. Slovakia, 1380. France again in 1394. Austria, 1420. Lyons, 1420. Cologne, 1424. Mainz again in 1438. Moving up in historical times, Naples, 1541, Prague, 1541, Genoa, 1550, Bavaria, 1551, Prague again, 1557, the Papal States in 1569, Hungary, 1582, Hamburg, 1649, Vienna, 1669, Slovakia, 1744, Moravia, 1744, Bohemia, 1744, and Moscow in 1891. Of course, they were kicked out of Spain in the year 1492 by Queen Isabella. Now, the Jews would have us believe that the reason they were kicked out of all these countries is simply because people are anti-Semitic. But that's nonsense. Because why would the people of these countries admit the Jews into their countries in the first place if they were such anti-Semites? That argument is patently fraudulent and self-contradictory. The reality is, the Jews, being the parasites that they are, having no crafts or working people, and not being able to farm because they were condemned, their ancestor Cain was cursed by Yahweh that they could not farm, that he and his ancestors could not farm. This is why Jews engage in parasitic practices such as being lawyers, doctors, their phony priesthood, and the deceivers and bankers and usurers that they are. This is the real reason why the Christian world and the secular world eventually turns against them. And this is the real reason why the Jews have become anathema in every nation in which they have existed. The fact is, it works like this. We white Christians build civilizations and city-states, and then the Jews move in after these nations and city-states become prosperous. Then they start promoting special privileges for themselves. They practice their usurious interest and banking practices among the people. They get the people in debt to the point where they become poverty encroaches. And that's when the people start getting sick and tired of the Jews, and they ask their monarchs, kings and queens, and or presidents to finally kick them out. This is exactly what happened in Spain. This is exactly what happened in France. And it's happening here today in America, folks. After 3 or 4 generations of having the Jews in our midst, our people are finally beginning to wake up that these Jews are destroying us through their parasitic practices. And it's time that America wakes up to the fact that it's the Jews who are destroying America. Now, we want to prove to you now that people are beginning to wake up to the Jewish factor, the Jewish question, as the Jews being the destroyers of civilization through their Mystery Babylon fractional reserve banking system. I'm going to be quoting from an article by Nigel H. Maund, Bachelor of Science, London, economic geologist. The article is titled Fiat and Credit, the Anglo-American Nemesis. And of course the Anglo-American nemesis he's talking about is the marriage between the Jews and the Blue Bloods, who have set them up in many businesses, and they run businesses together. In other words, the Blue Bloods have become traitors to their own people by participating in Jewish usury. Here is what he has to say. This fantastic cuckoo land has been created by the world's key merchant bankers, such as Goldman Sachs, S.G. Warburg, Kuhn Loeb, Salomon Brothers, N.M. Rothschild, Lazard Freres, etc. All these companies are Jewish, folks, who not only control the world's central banks, such as the Fed and the Bank of England, but own them in their entirety. They remain as faceless entities behind the puppet figure called the chairman or the governor, for whom the syndicated press creates a godlike persona that the Pope would be ashamed of. These bankers fully understand the idiocy and greed of the masses, as evidenced by tulip mania in Holland and the South Sea bubble in England, and various other manias that have driven the financial markets to ludicrous valuations in the near and distant past. However, people generally have a poor knowledge of history and a very short memory. They become the victims of these manias when they ultimately and inevitably collapse. In the past, losses were purely financial. However, this time the stakes may be a lot higher. Never in human history has mankind had the technical wherewithal and lack of political controls to create money out of thin air on such a stupendous scale, and of milking the planet dry with bank management charges and interest rates on money that quite simply does not exist, other than as digits in a computer. There has never been an open discussion of the consequences of such action in the world's democracies, and more fantastic still, this high-stakes global political and economic game has scarcely been questioned by the media. No one seems to care so long as the gravy train keeps on rolling. Now a quotation from Murray Rothbard about inflationary fiat paper. For nearly half a century, the United States and the rest of the world have experienced an unprecedented, continuous, and severe inflation. It has dawned on an increasing number of economists that the fact that over the same half-century the world has been on an equally unprecedented fiat paper standard is no mere coincidence. Never have the world's monies been so long cut off from their metallic roots. During the century of the gold standard, from the end of the Napoleonic wars until World War I, on the other hand, prices generally fell year after year, except for such brief wartime interludes as the Civil War. During wartime, the central governments engaged in massive expansion of the money supply to finance the war effort. In peacetime, on the other hand, monetary expansion was small compared to the outpouring of goods and services attendant upon rapid industrial and economic development. Prices, therefore, were normally allowed to fall. The enormous expenditures of World War I forced all the warring governments to go off the gold standard, and unwillingness to return to a genuine gold standard eventually led to a radical shift to fiat paper money during the financial crisis of 1931 through 33. It is my contention that there should be no mystery about the unusual chronic inflation plaguing the world since the 1930s. The dollar is the American currency unit, and pound sterling, the franc, the mark, and the like are equivalent national currency units. And since 1933, when Roosevelt took us away from the gold standard, there have been no effective restrictions on the issue of these currencies by the various nation states. In effect, each nation state since 1933, and especially since the end of all gold redemption in 1971 under Nixon, has had the unlimited right and power to create paper currency which will be legal tender in its own geographic area. It is my contention that if any person or organization ever obtains the monopoly right to create money, that person or organization will tend to use this right to the hilt. The reason is simple. Anyone or any group empowered to manufacture money virtually out of thin air will tend to exercise that right, and with considerable enthusiasm. For the power to create money is a heady and profitable privilege indeed. It should be clear that the point of the government's having the power to print money is to monopolize that power. It would simply not do to allow every man, woman, and organization the right to print dollars, and so the government invariably guards its monopoly jealously. It should be noted that government is never so zealous in suppressing crime as when that crime consists of direct injury to its own sources of revenue, as in tax evasion and counterfeiting of its currency. If counterfeiting of currency were not illegal, the nation's supply of dollars or francs would rise toward infinity very rapidly, and the purchasing power of the currency itself would be effectively destroyed. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what is happening to America right now. The purchasing power of the Federal Reserve note, which is a private banker's issue note, it is not U.S. government money. It's being inflated to the point of being effectively destroyed. Now, a little bit more information about fiat money history in the United States, and this is from kwaves.com. In a fiat money system, there is no restraint on the amount of money that can be created. This allows unlimited credit creation. Initially, a rapid growth in the availability of credit is often mistaken for economic growth as spending and business profits grow, and frequently there is a rapid growth in equity prices. In the long run, however, the economy tends to suffer much more by the following contraction than it gained from the expansion in credit. This expansion in credit can be seen in the debt-GDP ratio. We track the bubbles created by this expansion of debt at the inflation-deflation page. In most cases, a fiat monetary system comes into existence as a result of excessive public debt. When the government is unable to repay all of its debt in gold or silver, the temptation to remove physical backing rather than to default becomes irresistible. This was the case in 18th century France during the law scheme, as well as in the 70s in the U.S. when Nixon removed the last link between the dollar and gold, which is still in effect today. There is no connection between the Federal Reserve note and gold or silver. Hyperinflation is the terminal stage of any fiat currency. In hyperinflation, money loses most of its value practically overnight. Hyperinflation is often the result of increasing regular inflation to the point where all confidence in money is lost. In a fiat monetary system, the value of money is based on confidence, and once that confidence is gone, money irreversibly becomes worthless regardless of its scarcity. Gold has replaced every fiat currency for the past 3,000 years. So, we are going to see the Federal Reserve note decline into worthlessness, and then gold and silver and anything of value, any commodities of real value, will replace the Federal Reserve note. Now we're going to continue to establish the fact that all of these financial schemes of ancient Babylon and Mystery Babylon have always been in the hands of Jews. And of course, anybody who studies history knows absolutely that, especially during the Middle Ages, when Christians were forbidden to practice usury, only the Jews practiced usury. They were the only ones. And they have continued to practice usury since the days of Christ and since the days of ancient Babylon. We have been demonstrating this fact to you all along. Now we're going to be quoting from a document calling Spilling the Zionist Beans, Money, by Harold Wallace Rosenthal, who is Jewish. He was the Jewish administrative assistant to United States Senator Jacob J. Javits of New York, and he wrote this document in 1976. We Jews continue to be amazed with the ease by which Americans have fallen into our hands. It is a marvel that the American people do not rise up and drive every Jew out of this country. Our power has been created through the manipulation of the national monetary system. We authored the quotation, "Money is power." Money is more important than morality. We can accomplish anything with money. As revealed in our master plan, it was essential for us to establish a private national bank. The Federal Reserve System fitted our plan nicely, since it is owned by us. But the name implies that it is a government institution. From the very outset, our purpose was to confiscate all the gold and silver, replacing them with worthless, non-redeemable paper notes. This we have done. Prior to 1968, the gullible Goy could take a $1 Federal Reserve note into any bank in America and redeem it for $1, which was by law a coin containing 412 1/2 grains of 90% silver. Up until 1933, one could have redeemed the same note for a coin of 25 4/5 grains of 90% gold. All we do is give the Goy more non-redeemable notes, or else copper slugs. But we never give them their gold and silver, only more paper. We Jews have prospered through the paper gimmick. It's our method through which we take money and give only paper in return. Examples of this scam are numerous, but a few readily apparent ones are the stocks and bonds market, all forms of insurance, and the fractional reserve system practiced by the Federal Reserve Corporation, not to mention the thousands of millions in gold and silver that we have gained in exchange for paper notes, stupidly called money. Money power was essential in carrying out our master plan of international conquest through propaganda. At first, by controlling the banking system, we were able to control corporate capital. Through this, we acquired total monopoly over the movie industry, the radio networks, and the newly developing television media. The printing industry, newspapers, periodicals, and technical journals had already fallen into our hands. The richest plum was later to come when we took over the publication of all school materials. Through these vehicles, we could mold public opinion to suit our own purposes. The people are only stupid pigs that grunt and squeal the chance we give them, whether they be truth or lies. We have been successful in dividing society against itself by pitting labor against management. This perhaps has been one of our greatest feats, since in reality it is a triangle, though only 2 points ever seem to occur. In modern industry, where exists capital, which force we represent is the apex. Both management and labor are the base of this triangle. They continually stand opposed to each other, and their attention is never directed to the head of their problem. Management is forced to raise prices since we are ever increasing the cost of capital. Labor must have increasing wages, and management must have higher prices, thus creating a vicious cycle. We are never called to task for our role, which is the real reason for inflation, since the conflict between management and labor is so severe that neither has time to observe our activities. It is our increase in the cost of capital that causes the inflation cycle. These are the words of Harold Rosenthal, the Jewish assistant to Senator Jacob Javits. Now I want to stress the fact that the Christian churches are actually complicit in this Jewish destruction of our civilization, because very, very few pastors have ever preached any sermons on the false weights and measures and usury practiced by the Jews. And this should be the major topic of discussion in today's society, because everybody, every American citizen is being cheated, second by second, moment by moment, by the Federal Reserve Bank. Here is one preacher who lays it on the line. The title of this article is "A Sermon Never Heard in Church" by Pat Shannon. The 1965 Coinage Act decided for us that we could now imagine that coin slugs were legal tender dollars. However, Congress had no power at that time or any time to change what had been permanently fixed 173 years earlier. Not if we were to remain the same nation of states united that our founders founded. A lawful dollar was fixed for all time to be approximately 3/4 of an ounce, or 371.25 grains of silver. This deceitful switchover became the government's license to steal, not to mention the inevitable inflation to follow. Along with the income tax, and these twin sisters of deception became the key avenues leading to a conglomeration of secret, legalized crimes and the silent capture of we the people. Revenue is imaginary with paper money. Therefore, to report an income of dollars when no silver has been received is false reporting. The IRS deceivers will neither define a dollar nor income, nor will they display a law that requires one to file returns. Because Congress cannot pass a law, constitutionally speaking, tyrants exempted, requiring a citizen to give information to government agencies, at least not as long as it wishes to maintain the ruse that we still have constitutional protection. But back to the real law. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil. He's quoting Exodus 23:2. To march as cattle with millions of ignorant others every April 15th to file false reports of receiving dollars is following a multitude to perpetuate evil. Why do the heathen rage and imagine a vain thing? Psalms 2:1. Is there a singular, more vain act in the everyday lives of Americans than paying income tax to the IRS, which is also an illegal institution? Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. And they covet fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage. Micah 2, verses 1 through 2. Which agency is it defining here? Well, of course, it's the IRS and the Federal Reserve Bank. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Galatians 5:1. Does there exist today a stronger yoke of bondage than a phony income tax? Quote, no man can serve two masters. He cannot serve God and mammon. Matthew 6:24. Which shall it be, Christian? We are living in the age of Judeo-Christianity. But that's a self-contradiction, folks, because Jesus said, you are either for me or against me. You cannot be both for him and against him at the same time. You must decide whether you live truthfully, honestly, with proper weights and measures, or deceitfully with dishonest weights and measures and usury, which is totally forbidden by the Bible, and the Jews know it is. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's very important that you understand that the Federal Reserve international bankster system is actually responsible for the assassination of President JFK. We have already discussed the various presidents that they assassinated, from Lincoln through Garfield and McKinley. And now we're going to document the fact that the Federal Reserve was directly involved in the assassination of President Kennedy. First, let's give the economic background here. We're talking about the year 1963 from a document dated 11/27/1963. Quote, and this is from the Detroit Free Press. A new type of dollar bill was put into circulation Tuesday. The Treasury announced that 50 million new $1 Federal Reserve notes have been released through the 12 Federal Reserve banks and their 24 branches. The notes will not be backed up by silver. Before the issuance of the new bills, all paper $1 notes were silver certificates. The 1.8 billion of those certificates gradually will be replaced as they wear out, and the silver that is freed will be sent to the U.S. mints at Philadelphia and Denver. Again, this article is dated 11/27/1963, the year, and right around the time just after the death, the assassination of President Kennedy. Now I'm going to be quoting from an article entitled President Kennedy, the Fed, and Executive Order 11110. This is from Renzi.com. On June 4, 1963, a little-known attempt was made to strip the Federal Reserve Bank of its power to loan money to the government at interest. On that day, President John F. Kennedy signed Executive Order number 11110 that returned to the U.S. government the power to issue currency without going through the Federal Reserve. Mr. Kennedy's order gave the Treasury the power to issue silver certificates against any silver bullion, silver or standard silver dollars in the Treasury. This meant that for every ounce of silver in the U.S. Treasury's vault, the government could introduce new money into circulation. In all, Kennedy brought nearly $4.3 billion in U.S. notes into circulation. The ramifications of this bill are enormous. With the stroke of a pen, Mr. Kennedy was on his way to putting the Federal Reserve Bank of New York out of business. If enough of these silver certificates were to come into circulation, they would have eliminated the demand for Federal Reserve notes. This is because the silver certificates are backed by silver, and the Federal Reserve notes are not backed by anything. Executive Order 11110 could have prevented the national debt from reaching its current level, because it would have given the government the ability to repay its debt without going to the Federal Reserve and being charged interest in order to create new money. Executive Order 11110 gave the U.S. the ability to create its own money backed by silver. After Mr. Kennedy was assassinated just 5 months later, no more silver certificates were issued, as I just quoted from the November 27th Detroit Free Press. The final call has learned that the executive order was never repealed by any U.S. president through an executive order and is still valid. Why then has no president utilized it? Virtually all of the nearly $6 trillion in debt has been created since 1963. And if a U.S. president had utilized Executive Order 11110, the debt would be nowhere near the current level. Perhaps the assassination of JFK was a warning to future presidents who would think to eliminate the U.S. debt by eliminating the Federal Reserve's control over the creation of money. Mr. Kennedy challenged the government of money by challenging the two most successful vehicles that have ever been used to drive up debt: war and the creation of money by a privately owned central bank. In the fourth edition of the book Final Judgment by Michael Collins Piper, we have the following statement: Israel need not apologize for the assassination. And this he quoted from the Washington Jewish Week of 1997, because in this book, Final Judgment, Michael Collins Piper proves that highly positioned Jews, and several of them in Israel, were angry with JFK for his silver certificate money. And again, let me quote, Israel need not apologize for the assassination, unquote, Washington Jewish Week, 1997. Now I would like to quote from the words of Thomas Alva Edison, the great inventor, who demonstrates to us his understanding of the money question and what honest money is versus what dishonest money is. Quote, if our nation can issue a dollar bond, it can issue a dollar bill. The element that makes the bond good makes the bill good as well. The difference between the bond and the bill is that the bond lets money brokers collect the amount of the bond and an additional 20% interest, whereas the currency pays nobody but those who contribute directly in some useful way. It is absurd to say that our country can issue $30 million in bonds and not $30 million in currency. Both are promises to pay, but one promise fattens the usurer and the other helps the people. Now a statement from Sir Josiah Stamp, President of the Bank of England. He was one of the first presidents of that institution. And he says this, the modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banking was conceived in iniquity and born in sin. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money, and with a flick of the pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. Take this great power away from them, and all great fortunes like mine will disappear. Remember, he was the president of the Bank of England. He's admitting these things. And they ought to disappear. Let me start over on this sentence. Take this great power away from them, and they ought to disappear. For then this would be a better and perhaps happier world to live in. But if you want to continue to be the slaves of the bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let bankers continue to create money and control credit. Now we would like to present to you the understanding of this situation by our founding father, President George Washington. He understood that the Illuminati and the Jewish banksters were the ones responsible for this evil, corrupt monetary system. And he, as well as Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and all of our founding fathers, understood that the issuance of money and the creation of money and turning this power over to a consortium of private banksters is the greatest error that any nation could possibly make. Here are his words. This tribe of black gentry work more effectually against us than the enemy's arms. They are 100 times more dangerous to our liberties and the great cause we are engaged in. It is much to be lamented that each state, long before this, has not hunted them down as pests to society and the greatest enemies we have to the happiness of America. I would to God that someone of the most atrocious in each state was hung upon a gallows 5 times as high as the one prepared by Haman in the book of Esther. No punishment, in my opinion, is too great for the man who can build his greatness upon his country's ruin. Let vigorous measures be adopted, not to limit the prices of articles, for this, I believe, is inconsistent with the very nature of things and impracticable in itself, but to punish speculators, forestallers, and extortioners. Uniformity in the currency, weights, and measures of the United States is an object of great importance. A coinage of gold, silver, and copper is a measure which, in my opinion, has become indispensably necessary. Without a coinage, or lest some stop can be put to the cutting and clipping of money, our dollars, pistarenes, etc., will be converted, as Teague says, into 5 quarters, and a man must travel with a pair of scales in his pocket or run the risk of receiving gold at 1/4 less by weight than it counts. So, ladies and gentlemen, this subject of honest weights and measures, which is a biblical principle, was perfectly understood by our founding fathers, and the people of America have simply been brainwashed by the economic control of the Rothschild banking dynasty and their Jewish partners in crime to not understand money. It is absolutely vital that you, as an American citizen, understand that the issuance of money belongs to the government, not to these viper Jew banksters. Now I would like to quote Karl Marx, who was actually an employee of the House of Rothschild. He was hired by the Rothschilds to write Das Kapital. And this quote is prophetic because we are in this situation right now. Here are the words of Karl Marx. Owners of capital will stimulate the working class to buy more and more expensive goods, houses, and technology, pushing them to take more and more expensive credit until their debt becomes unbearable. Does that sound like today? The unpaid debt will lead to the bankruptcy of banks, which will have to be nationalized, and the state will have to take the road which will eventually lead to communism, unquote, Karl Marx. Now, ladies and gentlemen, America is going down this road because the federal government is becoming more and more powerful and tyrannical and communistic by the moment, and this is by design, by the design of the international banksters. I'm here to tell you right now that the New World Order is a Jewish conspiracy, it's a global plantation, and Barack Obama is their Uncle Tom. Now, we began this documentary by quoting the Bible, and also by quoting Revelation chapter 17, where the subject of Mystery Babylon is introduced. Now I'm going to quote to you chapter 18, which includes the judgment of the great whore of Revelation, the international banking system, the fractional reserve banking system, and money creation of the international Jewish elite. Here is what Revelation chapter 18, verses 1 through 17 says. After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He possessed great authority, and the earth shone with his splendor. In a mighty voice he proclaimed, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, for every unclean and loathsome bird. All the nations have drunk the wine of God's anger, roused by her fornication." Ladies and gentlemen, the world is cooperating with these international bankers. All nations are in their pockets, and all of the fornicators and corrupt politicians are in league with them. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and merchants of the world over have grown rich on her wealth and luxury at your expense, I might add. I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out from her, my people, lest you have any part in her sins and you share in her plagues. For her sins are piled as high as heaven, and God has not forgotten her crimes. Pay her back in her own coin. Repay her twice over for her deeds. Give her a potion twice as strong as the one she mixed. Measure out torment and grief to match her pomp and luxury. I am a queen on my throne," she says to herself. No widow's weeds for me, no mourning for me. That is why plagues shall strike her in a single day, pestilence, bereavement, and famine, and she shall perish in flames. Are you listening, Christian America? For mighty is the Lord God who has pronounced her doom. Why aren't your pastors teaching you this? The kings of the earth who committed fornication with her and wallowed in her luxury will weep and wail over her as they see the smoke of her burning. In terror at her torment, they will keep their distance and say, "Alas, alas for your great city, mighty city of Babylon, the city of London, owned by the House of Rothschild and all their international banking operations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, Federal Reserve Bank, Bank of England, Deutsche Bank, and all the rest. In a moment, your doom has come upon you. The merchants of the world will weep and mourn for her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, purple and scarlet cloth, silks and fine linens, all sorts of fragrant wood, and all kinds of objects made of ivory or of costly woods, bronze, iron, and marble, imported from China no less, at slave labor profits by the international banksters. The harvest you long for, they will say, is gone from you. All the glitter and glamour are lost, never to be found again. The traders in all these goods who grew rich on her will keep their distance in terror at her torment. Weeping and mourning, they will say, Alas, alas, for the great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, decked out with gold and precious stones and pearls, so much wealth laid waste in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, the Bible, properly understood, in Revelation chapter 17 and 18, has prophesied the world empire of merchants, of the house of Rothschild, the Jewish money-lending, usurious, create money out of nothing system that has enslaved the entire world and brainwashed virtually all Christians into accepting their slave master status over us without question, thanks to the Judeo-Christian pastors who refuse to teach the truth about the Jews and who refuse to teach the truth about the international banking system. You have been brainwashed, and you will never awaken until you know the truth.